The fact that my granddad listened to me on a podcast talking about going to sex parties and rang my mum up to tell her that it was really good shit, I'm so fucking grateful for that. When I'm talking to a new person about being non-monogamous, one of the first questions they'll often ask is, well, how do you do that? How does that work? And do your parents know? I think people have this big curiosity whenever it comes to something that is living a little bit outside of what is the mainstream expectation of us, you know, being a sex worker, being non-monogamous, being kinky, being bisexual even. People want to know, what do your parents think of that? And I think it comes from this sense of curiosity because they're trying to imagine how their parents might respond to them if they came out as one of those things or spoke to them about one of those things. I think it's that kind of curious relating rather than a nosiness or a pointedness. I'm Poppy Scarlett. If you don't know me, I also make content on Instagram under the name polyampoppy. I am non-monogamous and I have been for 10 years now, I would say. Wow, a full decade. That's kind of crazy. And I'm out to my parents. I'm going to tell you the story of how I came out to my parents. I am not out to every single family member because there are some of them that I just don't think it's necessary. You know, I'm not going to sit my old grandma down and explain to her what non-monogamy is and that I'm doing it. Like, it just doesn't feel necessary. We don't have this like close bond where I feel like this person needs to know everything about me. So it's just not a conversation I'm ever going to have. And she can barely remember one of my partner's names. You know, I've been with one of my partners for 11 years. She can barely remember his name. So adding another boyfriend into the mix, I just don't think it's worth it at this stage. I started in a relationship that was monogamous in my early 20s, and at some point that kind of morphed into being a non-monogamous relationship, and then I realised that I was polyamorous and that was a part of who I am and that I have the capacity to love multiple people at the same time. In the beginning, you know, my partner and I, we were both dating other people, we were having threesomes, we were going to parties, we were doing kinky things, and none of this stuff really seemed worth having a conversation with my parents about. You know, it was a part of who I was, but even though my parents are very liberal, it's still kind of an awkward conversation to have, right? So when I was just doing those things, it didn't feel worth it. And then I fell in love with someone else and we became official. She became my girlfriend. And at that point, I felt the desire to share this part of myself with my parents. Partially because it did feel like I was concealing a big part of who I was. I'm very close with my mum in particular, but also my stepdad, but mainly my mum. My biological dad, not so much in the picture. So I really wanted to share this information with my mum. And being in a quite serious relationship with someone, I didn't want to deny her the opportunity of having those experiences of being introduced to her girlfriend's parents. That is a part of being in a relationship for a lot of people, right? Like, if we're talking about that relationship escalator, you get to know each other, you call it official, you meet the parents, like, it's all part of it. And I guess even at that early stage, I knew that I didn't want to have that kind of hierarchy in my relationships where only the partner that I've been with for the longest gets to have access to certain parts of my life. Like, that's not how I wanted to do non-monogamy. I wanted to be able to give those experiences to the other people that I date and to not have them feel like they're being hidden from any part of my life. I'm a really open person, and to me it was just so worth having those kind of awkward conversations to be able to then introduce this person that I really care about, who's a big part of my life, to the other people in my life who are really important to me, like my mum. So that was a big driving force for me in having that conversation. I also started talking about sex and relationships on the internet. I started talking about going to parties, sex parties. I started talking about that on podcasts, started being invited to speak about non-monogamy on podcasts and about, I had a sex toy business at the time, an online store called Self and More. And through that, I was getting the opportunity to, speak at events and speak on podcasts. And I was starting to create social media content. Some of that was about my life. So while I hadn't had that conversation with my mum and stepdad, that information was still available online. So it was getting to the point where I kind of just needed to get ahead of it. I needed to be a big girl and just to have the slightly awkward conversation. So yeah, I decided I was going to tell my mum because she is the person that I'm closest with. And it basically just went like this. I said, can we talk? She said, oh God, what about? You're not pregnant, are you? Because I must have looked really serious. And I was like, oh, no, absolutely not. I just wanted to tell you that me and Adam are non-monogamous and I have a girlfriend. She's really great. And I just wanted you to know. And her response was great. She just took a minute to kind of like let it settle in. And then she asked me, oh, okay, so you like girls too, you're bisexual. And it kind of occurred to me that I never even came out as bisexual, you know, never even had that conversation. I guess, again, because I never had a girlfriend, I just had casual, like, sex and making out and all of that kind of stuff with women, with girls as a teenager. So there'd never been the impetus to have that conversation. Before I initiated that conversation, my heart was racing, my palms were sweaty. I was really nervous. Even though I knew it was going to go fine, I was still really nervous because it's such a vulnerable thing, I suppose, to share a part of yourself in that way. But she responded really well, and yeah, she asked me the kind of classic thing that I think a lot of parents would ask in this situation, like, is Adam happy, my other partner, is he happy? And I was like, yeah, he's happy, he dates other people too, he's got other people that are important to him, like, yeah, this is who we are, this is what we do. And she was just super chill. And that was about 5 or so years ago. So in that time, since I came out and had that conversation, I've introduced my parents to 3 different partners who have been really important to me, who I've been in love with, who have been big parts of my life, 2 girlfriends and my most recent boyfriend, who I introduced them to recently. And each time it's like just as awkward as you would expect it to be introducing any partner to your parents. I don't actually think the fact that we're non-monogamous makes that experience any different, to be honest. I think the first time my parents were a little bit more awkward, mainly because it was the first time meeting a woman, and I don't think they quite knew what to do with that information. It was like a new dynamic for us to all kind of sit with. But it went well and they really liked her. And yeah, I've even hung out with 2 of my partners at the same time with my family as well. And this Christmas, my mum got both of my partners a little present for Christmas. It's just, yeah, really nice. I don't necessarily think it's crucial to come out to your parents. Like, for me, I literally make content about non-monogamy on the internet. I kind of have to come out, like, I kind of had to, but I wanted to as well. But if that doesn't feel accessible to you, if you don't think it's going to be worth the emotional labour of having those conversations with your parents, if they're not my parents are quite young, they understand this stuff. You know, I didn't have to do any kind of heavy lifting in terms of justifying my lifestyle, which I know is a thing that a lot of people would have to do in this situation. If that emotional labour doesn't feel worth it to you, I don't think you should do it. I don't think you should have to do it. I think it's a deeply personal choice about whether you're going to let those people have that access to that part of you and understand that part of you. So yeah, I told my mum and my stepdad and they were really cool about it. You know, my stepdad is the kind of person who, when I was growing up, would love to make kind of blue jokes to try and make me feel embarrassed and awkward. And now, as a woman in her 30s who has owned a sex toy boutique, makes content about non-monogamy, has multiple partners, you can't embarrass me. Like, anything he tries to throw at me, I'm just like, you have been training me for this my entire life. I am ready to embarrass you, to make you feel awkward. So it's kind of like that dynamic is a bit of a joke. And I mentioned my grandma as well. Like, she's not going to understand, so I'm not going to tell her about it. My granddad, my maternal granddad, on the other hand, who is also, you know, tech savvy, young-ish for a grandparent, a few years ago, he actually rang up my mum and he said, have you heard Poppy on this podcast? It's great. You should really listen to it. When my mum relayed this information to me, the title of that podcast is The Messy Side of Masturbation with Poppy. And in that podcast, not only do I talk in great detail about wanking, But I also talk about going to sex parties and being in an open relationship. And my granddad listened to that and he loved it, apparently, so much so that he recommended to my mum that she listen to it. She gave me a ring and she was like, oh, I feel bad now that I'm not like keeping up to date with your stuff. Like, should I listen? And I was like, no, like, I love you, mum. You don't need to know that level of detail about my relationships with myself and with other people. Like, we're chill and we're open, but we don't need to have that. Like, we don't need to have that. But the fact that my granddad listened to me on a podcast talking about going to sex parties and rang my mum up to tell her that it was really good shit, I'm so fucking grateful for that. Like, that feels really special to me. It made me feel a little bit skin crawly, but I feel very grateful for that. And my mum actually said, I think your granddad probably would have liked to have known about non-monogamy a lot earlier. I think it would have quite suited him. So that's my coming out story. I would love to know yours. Are you out? Are you planning on coming out? Did it go as you expected? Let me know in the comments. And if you like, you can also follow me on Instagram, polyampoppy, where I make lots and lots of fun content about non-monogamy. Have a good day. I'll see you next time.